reckoning is finally here. No justice, no peace for too many years. We're marching for equality in every state.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing today? My name is Paul Byer. I'm the founder and the executive director here at the TomTom Foundation in Charlottesville. And on behalf of our board and the whole team, I want to thank each of you for being here. Today's event is part of a 7-week virtual event series called the Cities Rising Summit. Cities Rising will explore critical issues surfaced by the COVID-19 pandemic in the movement for racial justice, especially as they relate to small and mid-sized cities here in America. The Cities Rising Summit will run until October 30th, and we encourage you to get as involved as possible over the coming weeks. Weekly meet and greets, interactive changemaker sessions, Slack, Workplace. These are all options to connect you with leaders and changemakers across the country. And I also just note that all talks throughout Cities Rising be recorded, so if you enjoy today's program, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and share these speakers and ideas with your colleagues and friends. A little bit of housekeeping. You'll notice that there is a chat function on the bottom of your screen. There's a chat function for you to share ideas during the talk. There's also a Q&A button where if you would like to flag the moderator and let them know a question to ask the panel, we encourage you to do that. I see already some folks using the chat function. Folks come in from Chatham, from Richmond, from Nelliesford. So yeah, if you don't mind, just drop where you're coming from right now in the chat box. And excited to see a wonderful group of people from all over the country joining us for this wonderful session. So today's is actually the kickoff to this whole summit. The week one is Vital Signs, the urgent call to build healthier communities. This week is brought to you by the Hartfield Foundation, and today's session in particular is brought to you by the Thomas Jefferson Foundation at Monticello. Just thank them for their support and their collaboration. And the summit as a whole, allowing this to be a free event and fully accessible to thousands of people across the country is really due to our sponsors. And I'll just mention the anchor sponsors: Apex Clean Energy, Seaville Weekly, the Elizabeth Firestone Graham Foundation, UVA School of Education, and of course the Hartfield Foundation. This is part of what's allowing this whole series to occur and be so accessible. And we just give thanks to those sponsors at the front end of this session. So with that, I'll bring on Mayor Landrieu and just mention today's program is titled Capitals of the Confederacy Under New Management. And it looks at a rather historic occurrence where the former capitals of the Confederacy are now all run by Black mayors and have a new reflection on justice and equity and a new vision for the South. Mayor Landrieu, welcome. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Paul. Thank you. It's
great
to see you.
Wonderful. Well, I'll give you a little bit of an introduction. I won't make you introduce yourself. Of course, you're most famous as the mayor, the 61st mayor of New Orleans, serving from 2010 to 2018. Made some very controversial and courageous decisions around Confederate monuments in New Orleans. I know we have our own monuments here in Charlottesville that I think maybe deal with some of the complexities of local government. We, of course, have a state, law that does not allow us to take ours down. And then, of course, so we're in a little bit of a constrained situation. Of course, it's the realities of politics. And but excited to have you and see your leadership and kind of lead this conversation today. It's so resonant for our city.
Well, Paul, thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be with you virtually. I can't wait to get there in person one year. And I pray that we'll be able to do that next year. You know, I was thrilled. I served in the legislature for 16 years. I was a lieutenant governor of the state of Louisiana for 6. During the Katrina, Rita, Ike, Gustav, national recession, BP oil spill. And then I became mayor of the city of New Orleans and governed during a very difficult time, really relating to a lot of the issues that we have talked about and that we're dealing with today, from hurricanes, which we're all in the midst of right now, to racial reckonings, to monuments. So all of this is fresh to me. And I am just thrilled to be with two of America's great leaders. I was going to call them emerging leaders or young leaders, but the fact of the matter is they're in the saddle now, and they're both doing great work in really important cities in America. And so I'm thrilled to be able to have an opportunity to share the stage with them and learn from them about the challenges they face in their respective cities at probably one of the most pivotal times in the history of our country. And so I thank you for having us all, and we look forward to a really good discussion.
Wonderful. I'll let you take it from here and introduce these wonderful mayors. And again, honored to have you and look forward to this conversation.
And thank you. And we're here in the spirit of Heather Heyer. As you mentioned, the monuments and the difficulty that Charlotte's had, you know, she'll always be remembered. So with that, let me begin just to introduce very lightly, and then I'm going to ask them to tell you a little bit more about themselves. We are thrilled to be joined today by Mayor Levar Stoney, who was sworn in as Richmond's 80th mayor on December 31st, 2016. He actually is in a re-election campaign as we speak. He's the youngest mayor ever elected to serve the city. Since the people of Richmond elected Mayor Stoney, Richmond has been named the #2 place top millennials are moving by Time Magazine and top 25 place to live by U.S. News and World Report. Southern Living has also named Richmond one of the South's best cities. The Richmond Times-Dispatch recognized Mayor Stoney as the 2016 Person of the Year. And in June 2017, he was named a political rising star. In my opinion, he's already there. So Mayor, thank you for being with us. We also have Mayor Stephen Reed, who became the 57th mayor of the city of Montgomery on November 12, 2019. Mayor Reed has received the Dr. Martin Luther King Leadership Award for Government Services and was chosen as a New Deal leader. Steve was also invited to the Aspen Institute Justice and Society Seminar and traveled to Israel at the invitation of the American Israel Education Foundation, and has done an incredible job in the very short time he's been there. So mayors, both of you, congratulations on the successes that you've had to date. I know that you carry a lot of burden on your shoulders, and I know that you share with me that cities are really this nation's most immediate laboratory for innovation and change. So I welcome you both, and thank you for being part of this conversation, and would like to just start with asking you just to kind of expound a little bit for our audience members on your history, where you came from, you know, what really drove you into public service and where you find yourself today. So Mayor Stoney, if you mind, we'll start off with you.
Well, first, thank you, Mayor Landrieu, for moderating this panel today, and always thank you for being such a supporter and a mentor. And also thank you to Tom for once having these great conversations about current events and our past, and also where we're going as well. So I'm glad to be with everyone here today. Mitch, you touched on a little bit of my professional career, but you know, I always want to remind folks that, you know, I'm just a kid born to a couple of teenagers some years ago, and had the great fortune of being raised by my grandmother. And yeah, I was on free and reduced lunch, but my grandmother and my father, who were the ones who were mainly in my life, primarily in my life, they made a number of sacrifices so I can be the first in my family to graduate from high school, the first in my family to go to college, and the first in my family to graduate from college. I grew up in Hampton Roads, so I'm a Virginian. Some would say I come here, but you know, I got here as quickly as I could, grew up in Virginia, grew up in the Hampton Roads area of the state, ended up going to James Madison University. After that, I started a career in public service in Richmond, in the capital city, working in a number of political positions, campaign manager, political director, ran the state Democratic Party of Virginia when I was 26. Politics wasn't, something that my family and I spoke about at the dinner table. My parents didn't even vote. My grandmother and my father didn't even vote. But when I got involved in politics after graduating with a political science degree, they became very into politics. And so my dad was able to vote for President Obama. My grandmother was able to vote for President Obama. It was a big deal for them. After my work in inside campaign politics, I happened to meet a guy named Terry McAuliffe. I told him one day he could be governor. He wanted me to help him become governor. And I spent 3 years working for him. And after that, he won the election, appointed me Secretary of the Commonwealth, which is akin to Secretary of State in some other places. I did that for about 2.5 years. And one of my biggest accomplishments there was working on restorative justice, particularly the disenfranchisement of returning citizens, former offenders. Working with the Governor McAuliffe, we restored up to 150,000 rights to former offenders. And it's still the crowning achievement in my career. After working there, I decided to jump in the race for mayor some 4 years ago. I'm one of those guys, Mitch, that I'd rather jump into the arena than be on the sidelines complaining. I saw there was some good to be done in the city, and I thought, why not me to help out with that? So jumped in, won the race, and now we're 4 years fast forward, and I'm very, very proud of the work we've done over the course of the last 4 years.
Yeah, it went by fast, didn't it?
Went by fast. I got some gray hairs now. I'm not the spry 35-year-old I was earlier, but I still wake up every day loving my job. I love what I do. I love people. I love my city.
Well, Mayor, thank you for that. I'm going to come back to you because I want to ask you some questions, but I want to get Mayor Reed in here. Mayor, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you came from, what you're thinking about.
It's interesting, Mitch. First of all, thanks for having me. And,
sure.
Thanks for now, being a big example, I think, for all of us mayors, particularly us new mayors, and being a big brother, if you will, and giving us some of your thoughts and experiences that you went through in your 8 years as mayor of New Orleans. Certainly having a wife from New Orleans, I better make sure I put that in there very quickly.
You're right.
But I am originally from Montgomery, Alabama, born and raised here, left here, told my parents I was never coming back outside of Thanksgiving and Christmas. I grew up in politics. My father was one of the first black city councilmen when Montgomery went to a mayor council form of government in the mid-'70s. He had led the Black Teachers Association here and had been a civil rights activist here, leading the sit-ins here in 1960. And on my wall behind me is a picture of he and Dr. King in his last visit to Montgomery in 1967. And so, kind of growing up in that space, I was a PK, I was a PK, and I was one of those typical PKs who didn't want to do what the other PKs do. You have preachers' kids and you have politicians' kids. And when you grow up in that, it's one of those things where you either love it or you hate it. And I was one that hated it, and so I wanted to get as far away as I could. And after matriculating through Morehouse College, I went to American Airlines to work as a financial analyst, and that's really where I saw myself going in leadership. I really thought at that time there was a dearth of diversity in the C-suites in corporate America. Certainly there was a dearth of corporate board directors and diversity, and that's where I thought I would go after majoring in business administration in undergrad. And after being there and going on to get my MBA, I came back here to start my own business and to work with a couple of friends in our entrepreneurial endeavors. But I became very frustrated with what I was seeing happening politically. And I was trying to get friends and colleagues to run, and nobody wanted to run. And so around 2007, there's a senator named Barack Obama who came to speak in Selma, Alabama, and he spoke at the Brown Chapel AME Church. And one of the things that he talked about there was the poverty of ambition and doing things just for money. And that really had been what, the track I've been going along after business school, was really trying to find, okay, what ways can we make money and can we do things through capital, through the economic system, as opposed to the political system. So after hearing that, I started to kind of get the itch a little bit, but I still wanted to pull in some other people. And I said, listen, I'll be behind the scenes. You guys go and do X, Y, and Z. And I still couldn't get anybody to run. So I got a little bit closer. I took a position as a senior aide to the lieutenant governor at that time in 2009. and I started to see things happen at the legislative level. And as you know, being a lieutenant governor, when you're dealing with the state senate, there's a lot of things that happen day in and day out that most people never see or understand that happens at the state level of government. And even there, I grew to be more frustrated. And so out of that frustration, after trying to get some other friends to run in 2010, I had a good friend tell me, well, Steve, if you think politics is so important, why don't you do it? And I just kind of, smartly said, I just might. I didn't have any intention of doing that. That was just my comeback to them was, well, I just might do it. And so in 2011, I was approached about running for probate judge here in Montgomery County. There had never been a Black person to hold that office. And in our county form of government, the probate judge is the highest elected administrative official. I tell people it's 1/3 licensing commissioner, it's 1/3 chief election official for the county, and it's 1/3 civil judge dealing with probates, wills, mental health, and voluntary commitments and things along those lines. And so it's a position that has had throughout Alabama's history a lot of power, but there just had not been someone who was really, I think, looking out for the people's interests in that position. And so I decided to take the plunge. And after never telling my parents, I would never come back. That was one never. Then after telling them I would never get involved in politics, that was a second never. So I stopped saying never. And after serving in that role for about 6 years, where we were the first probate judge to legalize or to officiate same-sex marriages here in Alabama, overruling our Chief Justice at that time, Roy Moore, I decided that I wanted to be the thermostat, not the thermometer, and I thought I could do that by running for mayor here last year. And that's what I did, because we wanted to be in a position to try to set the tone of Montgomery and chart a new narrative for the New South. And I thought that I could best do that in this position relative to that on the bench. So that's kind of a short, sweet version, I hope,
well,
a little bit about me for those that are listening.
Those are both great stories, but I'm not going to let y'all off the hook. I know everybody wants to talk about serious stuff, but a couple things. Most people don't think mayors are real people, because y'all are both sitting in those nice big offices with those big flags and that big desk, and y'all probably got security and people call y'all Mr. Mayor and all that stuff all the time. But tell the folks that are listening, like when you were a kid, like what was your favorite hobby? Would you spend a little time doing? And then the second question is, like, when was the moment when it occurred to you that you really had to step up? Because Mary, you sound like you had some friends that were of the philosophy, let Mikey do it. Like somebody else is supposed to take care of it, right?
Exactly.
So tell all these folks that are listening a little bit about, what makes you real. And, that I know you got a big title behind your name, but you're just a regular person that people can grab every day, and touch in a real serious way.
Well, listen, I'll be real brief. My hobbies were sports. I grew up playing football and baseball. Always wanted to play basketball, but was never good enough and could never shoot well enough to get over the lack of height that I have. So I always tell my taller friends, the only reason why they could play basketball was because they were blessed with a vertical gift that I just didn't get. But I could play football and baseball, which I said took a lot more skill. So I was really into sports growing up, certainly into, doing those things, whether it was movies and Star Wars at that time, a lot of those type movies, things that I'm trying to get my sons into now, they just look at me crazy. And then playing video games. I tell my son now, I'm like, you're not the first one to play video games and you're excited about it. You just have to compartmentalize it. So, a lot of the video game wars and stuff like that we did growing up. And so, real good time, a lot of hobbies, a lot of fun.
Right. And just tell me before I go to Mayor Stoney on this issue, what's the one thing you can hear your daddy in your head telling you, when you in your office late at night by yourself and things are hard?
Oh man, yeah. The easy thing is, what? He says there's nothing that's politically right that's morally wrong. And always remember to keep the people first. Those two things are very easy for me to recount in my head, because I probably hear them in my head several times a day. Yeah.
Mayor Stoney, what about you? What's your hobby? And tell me about what you can hear your grandma telling you when things are getting tough.
My hobby was not too dissimilar from Steve's, and that was, I was into sports. I'm the older brother, so I have a brother who's about 2.5 years younger than me. So we were very competitive. My dad kind of taught us to be very competitive. to compete when we got not only on the field and on the court, but also compete in the classroom as well. I won the competition in the classroom. My brother was not so much into academics back then, but I played football. I was the quarterback of the football team in high school, captain. I ran track. I played basketball for a couple of years as well. Just like Steve, I was a good defender, but I was not necessarily a great shooter or a great offensive talent. And
Right.
football was my main hobby. And just like Mayor Reed, before the video games that they have today, Madden 21, whatever, all these, the basketball games and whatnot, I used to be the person who I would take down the statistics of our games. So if players scored all these points, I would log all the statistics and basically write a whole season for me and my brother to play. Before they had season mode and before they had, franchise mode, I was the guy who did all of that. So my brother thought, man, this kid's a nerd, but he's also into video games as well. I used to log all the statistics and break out the awards, and my brother was really into it. So nowadays when I visit with him, he lives in Portland these days. He's like, you want to play video games with me? I'm like, nah, is out of it. I used to do all that work. Now the video game does all the work.
Right. It's incredible. What about what can you hear your grandma who raised you telling you when things get tough? I tell people, the mayor's a lonely job. When you're in your office late at night, you're the only one who can make the call. You got to have somebody that you're thinking about.
When I would come home on a Friday night after sometimes getting banged up in a football game, we would get blown out or something like that, or maybe as playing quarterback, I might have thrown a few bad passes, a couple interceptions or something like that. And she doesn't know anything. She would not know anything about football, but I would come in with my head down and she was like, what's wrong? I said, oh, we lost again, Grandma, or we lost. And she said, it's all right, baby. You can't win them all. And pick your head up. You got to live to play another game, and so play another day. And so that's what I always, remind my team. That's what I always tell myself, that, I can't win them all, and, live to fight another day.
Well, I think those are good. And Mayor, look, we could stay here a long time talking about this, but at some point in time, both of y'all realize y'all weren't going to be professional athletes. And I know that hurt both of you. So you got stuck running cities. And Mayor Reed, just the other thing is, the first order of politics, you never say never. So when somebody asks both of you, when you're going to be the president of the United States, don't say never. Right. Don't say that, because you might surprise yourself. Well, listen, thank you all for sharing those issues with the audience. I raise them because a lot of times, mayors can be one-dimensional to the public, and folks don't really realize that there's a human being behind all those hard decisions that you guys are making. But I'm guessing that both of you, when you were both thinking about running for office, you had a reason why you were running. You came up with a vision for your city. You probably laid it out in a 4-point plan. You had your public, communications people talk about it, about what you're going to do with your city. I'm assuming that's right, correct? Yeah. All right, so now this is why I laid the predicate for this. Now that you did that, I feel like Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a strategy till I punch him in the mouth. So here we are sitting today. I'm in the city of New Orleans. Mayor, I think Mayor Reed, you're in Montgomery. Mayor Stoney, you're in Richmond. And we have a hurricane, another one came last week. We've got 7, I think, out in the Gulf. You've got wildfires in the West that are putting pressure on the national government and their ability to respond. You've got a pandemic that's creating an economic crisis, and it's creating another clearly disparate impact in our communities. We have social unrest in our communities surrounding the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, a racial reckoning. We have difficult issues relating to criminal justice. And this is just on top of all the other things that you do. And so my question to you guys is, how have the ideas that you've had and the things that you were doing been impacted by all of these other things? And how are you adjusting your work schedules, your strategies, how you're conditioning the public, and the impact that you've had to effect in a really short period of time, given all the things that are coming our way, while still keeping the folks in your cities optimistic that we can actually get this together? Now, I know that's a big question, so I want y'all to take time. to think about it, and we'll go back and forth a little bit. But Mayor Reed, why don't we start with you on this one, and Mayor Stoney will catch you on the backside.
Yeah, I think that sometimes you feel like a juggler, right? And you've got a lot of balls in the air, and you're trying not to drop any of them. And from time to time, you probably do. And I think from our standpoint, what we came in on, now we've been in office about 10 months. And after about, before our first 100 days was over, we get hit with COVID and all the complexities that come along with that. I think for me, what we tried to do was we tried to prioritize the most pressing issue that we had at the time. And for us, that was COVID-19, along with some things that we had in our 100-day plan, our 6-month plan, and so forth. But we understood that we were going to have to delay some of those and kind of postpone some of those initiatives that we had because of this, once in a lifetime 50-state national disaster, if you will, that we're all trying to get our arms around. And for us, that meant really pushing off some of the announcements, pushing off some of the initiatives that we wanted to implement, but also it meant making sure that we were talking to other mayors, other cities about, what were they doing? How are they preparing for this? Making sure we were talking to mayors who had been through similar type situations before, certainly not to this level, but whatever that may have been in their city, to try to get a sense of where we needed to be. And I think that from my standpoint, what we were able to do was we started off with pretty much, daily COVID updates with our EMA director and my chief of staff, and pretty much everything after that was secondary to COVID. And, so crime, education, economic development, infrastructure issues, many of the things that we wanted to address really had to take a back seat, if you will, in terms of new approaches. So we kind of had to leave some things in place as long as they were working, at least to some degree before we could go in and kind of assess them and reevaluate and maybe do something different. Now that we've kind of gone through this for a few months, we've been able to kind of change that a little bit and really start now to reassess those things that we wanted to prioritize and we probably would have during those first 100 days or after that, to start drilling down into the operations of the city and really looking at some of the efficiencies that we have. But even with that said, you still got your budgets, you still got your issues with public transportation, you still have issues that you're trying to work out in other areas, parks and recreation, your IT, whatever that department or that division may be, you're still trying to move those things along. But for us, it really has been about COVID-19, what's that impact, where's the community, and everything else kind of coming second to that.
Yeah, thank you. Mayor Stoney?
Yeah, I'm sure you've been through this as well, Mayor Landrieu, is that, when I started off, I gathered my team in late 2016 and sort of charted out what I wanted to do for 4 years. And, there's only but so much capital you really have, whether it's fiscal capital or political capital that you have that you actually have at the disposal to use year by year. And I sort of planned everything out. We're going to work on building new schools this year. We're going to work on expanding after school programs this year. We're going to work on housing this year. We're going to work on something else in year 4. Well, all that goes out the window when there's an emergency, right? And when I told my team a couple of weeks before the pandemic struck here in Richmond to just start thinking about this, start planning for this. Like if we just think about the scenarios that we may have to go through if something were to happen. But then I think it caught us, right around St. Patrick's Day weekend. And we kind of went into emergency mode. And I called a number of organizers of these mass events up, and I begged them personally, hey, can you close? Can you shut everything down? Can you postpone? We'll give you a permit for another day. And I think they were all shocked that I was taking it so seriously, but I saw up the street in DC what Mayor Bowser was doing. I saw a couple of my colleagues were doing in the Northeast, and I knew it was just a matter of time that it was going to end up here in Richmond. And so I had to act as if it was here today, because we all knew it was here. So we shut everything down, and all the things I was working on, as Mayor Reed said, kind of got pushed to the side or postponed a little bit. I mean, I remember on March 6th, I announced a very a progressive, bold budget, but then a month later, I'm talking about cuts because of the projections of
Right.
all the businesses being closed and people being home. And so what we've done is mobilize and leverage some of the assets we currently have at our disposal to help the most vulnerable in the community.
Yeah.
And I said earlier, this disease, this virus is wreaking havoc on Black and brown and most vulnerable communities. And in Richmond, we're roughly Black and brown people are over 50%, but Black people themselves are like 48%. And so I wanted to know, where was this virus living, right? Who was being impacted the most? Frontline people working at grocery stores, in factories, and manufacturing, you name it. And slowly but surely, I know a lot of folks were mad. We shut everything down. We worked with the governor on our response, and I feel good about where we are today. But I'm watchful, right? I'm concerned, always concerned, because there is no therapy, there is no vaccine, and all we can really do now is we got to continue with robust testing. So testing and tracing and just boxing this virus in. And so it really takes us appealing to the public that here's the data-driven approach, and this doesn't come from gut. You can't really make these sort of decisions in a state of emergency from gut. You got to use the data that's before you in real time and make the best decision possible. And is everyone going to agree with your decision? When I asked for folks to start wearing masks, or I said that we should slow down reopening, I mean, I was hit with a lot of vitriol, but I knew that it was the best for the greater community. It was the best for the greater good. And so I look at where we are today. I'm still watching that data, talking to my health director on a regular basis. And then when you add the civil unrest on top of it, you can be able to balance, as Mayor Reed said, juggle all of that. You're concerned about the protesters in the street transmitting the disease. You're concerned about businesses, having to close their doors or board up their doors because some protesters may have gotten violent. It's this balance you have to. Every day brings a new challenge. And Mayor Landrieu, I will say this: there were weeks, and my team will say, we were worried about you. There were weeks where I didn't eat 3 meals a day or ate a meal a day. I think 72 hours was a 72-hour stretch where I had 3 meals and had 3 hours of sleep.
That's why I asked you about your grandma. You can hear your grandma in your head saying you need to eat.
Yes, you need to eat.
Or I'll slap you in your head. But but I want to drill down on this a little bit, because I want to make sure our listeners really understand that generally when there's an emergency and there's an official declaration of an emergency, the way power works, it changes, because we live in a government where there's a lot of checks and balances. But generally, when the president calls an emergency, or a governor calls an emergency, or the mayor, the mayor basically gets to be the person that has to make the tough decisions in quick times. And I wonder, Steve, I know you had some issues where you guys have to think about, well, am I going to close down? Am I not going to close down? Do I have to work in partnership with my governor or not? Mayor Reed, I think you live in a red state. Mayor Stoney, you had a red state, and maybe it's blue. So help everybody who's listening understand the kind of thinking that you have to go through, where you're closing stuff down, you're mandating masks, you've got the business community pushing back against you. How do you reach across the aisle? And what's that process that both of you have had to live through in the last 16, 18 weeks to kind of get your city in a place, just on the COVID piece? I want to talk about the racial reckoning piece in a minute, but just on the meats and potatoes of the kind of strains that you have and the kind of things that you have to balance going forward. Mayor Reed?
Yeah, Mitch, I think for us, it was really one of those things that I'm less than a mile, City Hall is less than a mile to our state capitol where the governor's office is here in Alabama. And, Richmond also being the state capital of Virginia, I would imagine Mayor Stoney is in some of the same proximity to state leaders that I might be. And you try to get a sense of where they are. And we had spoken with the governor's chief of staff prior to some of the decisions that we made. But ultimately, what I felt in terms of the communication, whether that was social media, whether those were official statements and positioning, was that they weren't where we were. And, you know, I first was given a heads up about COVID, literally leaving Washington, D.C., where all of us were for the U.S. Conference of Mayors in late January. And maybe about a week or so after that, we started to talk to our EMA about the what-if scenarios, kind of like Levar was pointing out. And so I think for us, one of the things we tried to do was, all right, you know, we wanted to find out if the governor was going to be proactive or if the governor was going to take more of a wait and see approach. And with us, given that so much of the power of Alabama in terms of cities, how they're funded, how laws are passed, is concentrated in our state legislature, having that conservative legislature, which was still in session, by the way, really did make a difference. It factored into our decisions because I didn't know if we had a friend or a colleague or someone that might support some other initiatives or might try to cut off some of our initiatives if they felt we were maybe trying to show up the government. So we wanted to make sure that we over communicated with her staff, and we wanted to make sure that, you know, despite the ambivalence of the White House and the leadership there, that we had some decisions we were going to have to make. And so we tried that directly and indirectly. And with us, that was something that we decided to move forward with. And then as we kind of started to make decisions, first it was a kind of a warning, then it was a curfew, and then we moved to shelter in place. We started to increase our collaboration with the governor's office. And we also started to see that the state legislature, as well as the business community, was understanding the science and the data that we were getting from various outlets through other entities that partner with mayors across this country that were really science-based and data-driven, that I think many of us made our decisions from.
Yeah, and what's the current state of COVID, incidences of COVID and deaths in your city?
It's still too many, but we have slashed over half where we were in our peak in June.
Yeah.
So we're now down to less than 5% positive rate, but I don't think that we still have the amount of testing that's needed throughout the community, and that's what I'm worried about kind of going to this fall season and early winter.
Okay, Mayor Stoney?
Yeah, you know, a different setup here in Richmond because of the Commonwealth and where we are in our politics today. And as you said earlier, Mayor Landrieu, that this was formerly a red state, but now a blue state where the General Assembly here, the state legislature, and the governor are all of the same party. And I happen to be of the same party as well. And I'll admit, you know, I think they would even tell you that we were the first locality to start asking for or prohibiting mass gatherings. And when we started doing that, I think that really, I don't think it caught them. We didn't catch the governor off guard, but we definitely gave him a heads up that that's where we were headed. So I feel like we led on that. And we led on a couple of other items. And, you know, I have the power of power of recommendation. I don't have the power of requirement here in the city when it comes to sort of these sort of measures. And so when I thought about requiring something, I always checked in with the governor and said, Governor, this is where my head is. I'm a little concerned about this virus, and so I'm thinking about doing X, I'm thinking about doing Y. And he would say, let us do it together in collaboration. So it's just not one locality doing something and then the outlying localities doing something else. And because, as you know, Mitch, you know, people go back and forth from county into the city into the county. And so I worked with the governor on some of the ideas I had, the mask mandate. We were one of the first localities to ask for a mask mandate. And I think that helped motivate the governor to do the right thing and require masks here and face coverings in the Commonwealth. And so it's always been us working in tandem. The governor invited me to a number of his COVID briefings early on, just to show, I think, Richmond, the Richmond region, but also the state, that we are doing this together. And I think the key for us as local elected leaders and as mayors, as municipal chief executives, is that we got to let the data dictate where we go. I think people have been seeing a lot of mixed messages coming out of the federal government. And I think they expect us to speak truth to power, particularly when it comes down to their safety, health, and well-being. And, you know, I always reminded my team that there's no need for us to politicize anything. Just prescribe to the public what they need to do. And a lot of times they will rise to the occasion, but they don't want this mess of, like, you know, the data says one thing, but what we're doing the opposite. They want straightforward direction in times like these.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Those are really good meat and potato discussions. I want to kind of jump into the issue of race now and talk a little bit about race, racism, racialism. You know, all of us are proud Southerners. I know we love the South. And everywhere I travel across the South, I traveled to 13 states. I've talked to 1,100 people, white, black, you know, rich, poor, Hispanic. Everybody loves the place that they're from. And we love it so much, it hurts in so many ways. And so I want you to just think about it. I know y'all were thinking about COVID. It's true that COVID doesn't discriminate, but the consequences and the impacts of COVID based on the data have indicated that people of color are being hurt in disproportionately more consequential ways. We got that issue. We've got the racial reckoning that we're dealing with Black Lives Matter and police and community reform. And then we have the monuments. From my perspective, they're kind of all tied together. I'm going to name drop here, but last week I was on a panel with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and which I was really pumped up about, I have to say. But he said something that really kind of struck me as a picture. He said, racism is like dust. If you turn the light on, you'll see that it's everywhere. It has such an incredible pervasive impact in our lives. So I want you guys to talk to me a little bit. Mayor Reed, I know you're the first African-American mayor of Montgomery. Mayor Stoney, I think Virginia's had one African-American governor, Doug Wilder, and that's just like a rare thing in the state of in the United States of America. Mm-hmm. And so I want you to talk about how race has impacted your lives, how it's impacted how you're governing. What do you see right now about how you navigate through these issues and where we need to get in this country sooner rather than later?
Well,
Mayor Stoney.
Yeah, well, you know, I think Mayor Reed would probably agree here that, you know, particularly in the South, we've faced racism that has been covert and a lot of times overt as well. I was just talking to a Norwegian network early this morning. They wanted to come to Richmond and just interview me about, you know, what we've been through this past summer. And I told her that, you know, when I was a kid growing up in Hampton Roads in the eastern part of the state, I grew up in an area that was predominantly white. And when you grow up in an area like that, you know that you're Black. People remind you that you're Black. And sometimes it's in a very direct fashion. And sometimes it just stands out because you're the only person in the class, the only person at the event, the only person on the team. And even as a child, I had people call me a nigger before. I've had people drive by with Confederate flags and yell out nigger to me and whatnot. And I've also been stopped by police officers with no reason for being pulled over or no reason to be asked to search my car and have to put my hands on the hood. It is something that, you know, if you think about it on a daily basis, it could be debilitating, right? It can paralyze you. And my father taught me that no matter how the people the people in the room may look different than you, but you go in there and you compete with them, that you're just as smart as them, you're just as quick as them. And guess what? You're not going to always win, but you should let them know that you're going to be in the room and they're just going to have to deal with it. And that's kind of how I've always lived my life. However, you know, I saw what race did to my father, what it did to my grandmother. My grandmother was a woman who grew up in the South. She grew up in the low country of South Carolina. So she took her own, she had her own experiences with white people that, you know, that she obviously warned us about, you know, because she was fearful of our safety. You know, if we acted out in a different place, she knew that there were different consequences for me compared to some of my white friends or my white counterparts. And so you're always aware of that, right? You're always aware of what not to do, what places not to be, particularly when you're in the South, you know. And as I grew up and went to college and whatnot, you know, you still encounter people who still hold these beliefs, but you also have to remember what, you know, my father and my grandma said: you are there for a reason, and don't let anybody tell you what you can and what you cannot do. And I see it in my city. You know, I moved to Richmond after I graduated from James Madison University, and I've been living here for 16 years, and this is my home. I love this place. But race in the former capital of the Confederacy has always bubbled underneath the surface. And it's one of those, it's like a nerve that, you know, it's there, and it's almost like going to the dentist, and when the dentist is digging away and, you know, you hit that nerve and like, woo, and you feel it. And I felt that on the issue of the monuments, which was always known as the third rail. You see it play itself out with COVID-19 and the pandemic. You know, what the pandemic has done for us as a country, but for me as a mayor in the city, it is unfortunately, it's placed a mirror in front of our faces, and it's asked us, do you like the image that is coming back across that mirror? And I think a lot of people, that's why I think folks were in the streets this summer, is they do not like the reflection, right? They now see all the warts that, you know, you could easily cover up over the many, many years, the hundreds of years. But now I think what the murder of George Floyd and the pandemic has done is put it all on Front Street. And we have asked the question, are we going to do something about it, right? Are we going to be comfortable, accepting of this image, or are we going to change that image? And you know, the work I did this past summer to start removing those symbols, and also look at the work that we did, you know, on the pandemic, where we specifically targeted our most vulnerable communities for the testing, because the data showed across this country in places like Illinois and Michigan that this was a disease that was wrecking Black and brown communities. And so we saw that in other places and said, this is where we need to go. And so it has certainly been a reckoning of some sort this summer, I think, Mayor Landrieu. But I always tell folks the proof is in the pudding. If we have the same disparities and the same gaps between Black and white 10 years from now, then everything that we've worked on this year, right, is all for naught. If we have the same gaps in home ownership between Black and white people, in education achievement, in generational wealth, if those gaps are still as large as they are today in 2020 and 2030, then we have missed our moment. And I don't want my city to miss our moment.
Yeah, from New Orleans, we say true that. Mayor Reed, can you talk about that a little bit, race and how it's impacted, you know, those issues that Mayor Stoney talked about in your city?
I mean, it's hard to follow that up. I mean, I think he touched on so many themes that, you know, in my opinion, are universal regardless of where we are. Because for so long, race has been taught as it was only a Southern issue. It was only just something that happened in the old Confederate states. And we didn't really have those issues in the big cities and in urban America. And I think, you know, what we've seen in the era of Donald Trump is we've seen that, no, we've always had those issues. If you talk to people who left Louisiana and moved out to California in the 60s and 70s, they would tell you about the segregated areas in LA. If you talk to some of my family members who left and moved to New Jersey and moved to Queens, New York, they would tell you about those segregated areas there. And so, you know, when we think about race, unfortunately, I think it's been taught from the perspective of our good Northern brothers and sisters who have not looked at the speck in their own eye when it comes to what happens here, until you have a son of New York in the White House who's inflaming all these thoughts and emotions out here, campaigned with racial rhetoric that I said then and I say now. Had that person been from South Carolina, had they been from Virginia, Alabama, or anywhere in the SEC, they would have never gotten out of the Republican primary because the media would have held them accountable, would have come down on them too hard. Yeah. But because that person wore a suit and because that person went to an Ivy League school, there was a belief that, well, he doesn't really mean what he says. No, he means more than what he says because he's done what he says.
Right.
We've seen that throughout. And so I think for me, you know, growing up, certainly in a place like Alabama, it's always there. There always a recognition, and we look for the slightest bit of progress as another reason to exhale. And what we have seen is that while we've made progress, there is still a lot more to do. As Mayor Stoney pointed out, you still have those gaps in education, access to healthcare, income inequality, go across the lines,
Right.
and you see that. And so what we try to do is talk about not just equality, but equity. And we tried to have those conversations with business leaders. We tried to have those conversations with influencers and connectors. Because one of the things that I learned in talking to former mayor of Atlanta, Maynard Jackson, as well as Ambassador Andrew Young about, you know, what it was like in the 70s when they were mayors, and even to the 80s here in major cities, it was, you have to talk to the business community. You have to make sure that they understand their role in this and that, so that it's not just on you as a political leader. There has to be more from the standpoint of economics as well as political progress. And unfortunately, we haven't gotten there. And what we've heard since the killing of George Floyd from a number of corporate leaders and corporate boards and so forth is that we want to change. Well, you know, part of that has to be about how the economics of this country is distributed and how and who gets to play a role in that. And again, quite frankly, whether you're in Hollywood or you're in Silicon Valley or you're in Wall Street or whether you're, you know, in healthcare in the South, quite frankly, you see those things still being divided along the lines of race. And so where I think we are right now, and we're, you know, benefiting by being in the city that's home to the Equal Justice Initiative,
Yep.
Peace and Justice Memorial, Brian Stevenson, the work that he's done over the last 30 years, where we have kind of a person and now an entity where people can go and reflect on the history of race in this country. And now we can talk about reconciliation, but we can't get there until we're truthful about it. And I think what the Black Lives Matter movement has forced us to do, and I commend the millennials and Gen Zs for forcing us, of all colors, all the people who've been a part of that movement, because I think they have forced us to have this conversation now and not wait until it was maybe a little bit more comfortable or convenient for us to talk about Colin Kaepernick taking the knee, or a little bit more convenient about songs and rap lyrics that have been put into the air, and why we have so many people protesting against this injustice, not just police shootings of unarmed Black men and women, but just the system itself that shows where the wealth is going in this country, who's not a part of that, who are the frontline and essential workers are disproportionately, and who is impacted by everything negative, unfortunately, that seems to happen in this country, coming along the lines of race, versus those that seem to benefit even during downtimes, and who benefits from that and who prospers from that. So I think we're at this point where we're forced to talk about these issues. And I think as leaders and as people who care about the reconciliation of race in this country, we have to be truthful, we have to be honest, and we have to have the uncomfortable conversations and then talk about what we're going to do in order to close the gap and move us a little bit further down the road.
Yeah, excellent points. Mayor Stoney, you know, the youngsters are pushing a mirror in our face and say, y'all need to look in the mirror and ask yourself how you look. And Mayor Reed, you made a couple of comments. You know, I have a chip on my shoulder as a Southerner too, when I traveled around the country and people thinking racism is just in the South, and we know it's all over the place. The fantastic Isabel Wilkerson wrote the book Warmth of Other Suns that folks should read about the great migration. Of course, Brian Stevenson with the Peace Memorial in Montgomery. If people have not been able to see it, to see the true history of lynching in America, that tells us a lot more than what the Confederate monuments are trying to tell us. It's critically important. And Mayor Stoney, you know, now that you know the youngsters have forced us to look at it, Dr. King wrote a book called Where Do We Go From Here? I like to retitle that book, is it now that you know what you're going to do. And so I want to kind of just, we only have about 5 minutes left, and I want to ask you, both of you guys, to think about this idea of the New South that has been around and what that means to you. And the frame is that, you know, back in the day, there was George Wallace. There were, you know, governors that were white. We had sheriffs that were, you know, not doing what they were supposed to be doing. And then all of a sudden in New Orleans and Atlanta with Maynard Jackson and Andy Young, who's by New Orleans from, by the way, he's born here, so we claim him. And all of a sudden, you know, Keisha Lance Bottoms is in Atlanta, and Mayor Reed, you're in Montgomery, and Mayor Stoney, you're in Richmond, and Mayor Lumumba is in Jackson, and Mayor Perkins is in Shreveport, and Mayor Cantrell is in New Orleans, and Mayor Broome, all of a sudden, all African-American mayors across the South. What does that idea mean to you? And what is getting there, you know, for the country look like? And, you know, whichever one of you wants to go first, we got about 5 minutes left, so I'll just leave it to you to close us out on what the vision for the future looks like under your leadership.
Well, you know, I think, Mayor Landrieu, that the examples you threw out there of all the Black and progressive mayors that we have throughout the South just shows you that that we are changing as a geographic community in this country. However, as I stated earlier, that the proof is in the pudding. And what I tell folks today is that, you know, I appreciate the allyship of those who march in the streets, many who don't look like me. I appreciate that in this moment. However, if we are going to live up to truly that Black Lives Matter, that means those who have the yard signs in their yard or the sign in their window at their homes, that when it's time for us to advance inclusive and equitable policies about housing, about the integration of schools, about a number of other topics, that they still stand with us on those topics. And obviously, as I could sum up what Stephen said earlier and what I've stated earlier as well, that change in the South is tough. It is tough. But I think you said something to me long ago, Mayor Landrieu, is that we signed up for this job to make the tough decisions. And you make those tough decisions early. But that's part of the job. If we're not moving the needle forward and I guess pushing the envelope, right? I'd rather push the envelope instead of sit around and just push paper all day. Yeah. I think some folks think that's our job, is to push paper and just fill the potholes and just make sure the trash is picked up on time. I really do believe that our job is to lift people up and not write people off. And that's in a number of different facets, and it's going to take a progressive, bold agenda to do so. And I love the fact that we got the leaders in the South to make it happen.
Well, I thank you for doing that. One of my dad used to tell me, son, use the political capital that you have to help other people. What the hell else do you have it for? So I always remember he was in my head when I got nervous.
Yeah, we worked so hard. We worked so hard, Mayor, to get ourselves elected and whatnot. Why get in office and do nothing?
You can't take it with you. Mayor Reed, why don't you close us out with your vision for what the New South looks like?
Well, I think, again, you all have touched on a number of the topics and the areas that we all believe in. Mayor Landrieu is former mayor of New Orleans, a legacy mayor as well, and the trailblazing path that I think Mayor Stoney has carved out there in Richmond. I point to Richmond a lot as the real capital of the Confederacy. I have to remind my friends here in Montgomery that the Confederacy was only here for 4 months, yet we hold on to it dearly as if it was foreign.
Only 4 years here. We hold on it too. I mean, we can't.
I said it, they left you. They left you to go to Richmond, but you can't tell people here that. And so I think that, you know, for us, what I want to see and what I vision of the New South is one that is more equitable for everyone. And I hope that those partners with the Tom Foundation and those partners across this country that are really looking for places to make a change will look to the South. As people now migrating back, in particular people of color are migrating back to southern cities. And for some, they're just discovering the greatness of a New Orleans. They're just discovering the greatness of a Richmond or of a Birmingham, of an Augusta, Georgia, and others. You know, what we really need are opportunities. And one of the things that I try to talk to foundations or corporations about is, hey, think about bringing jobs here. Think about investing here. And you want to make a statement, then the best statement that you can make is not really come to the South and talk about this, how great the people are. It is to do something. It is to take action. And I think for those of us that are in political positions such as this, that's what we have to do, is we have to talk about the opportunities and the lack of capital that comes to the South, that comes to southern cities. And when you look at still disproportionately where Black people live in this country, it is in the South. And so for all of those allies, all those who seek to make change, then to me, change starts right here. Change starts where it has always happened with the people here. And for us to be really, really a new South, I think that means a new economy and being full participants in the economy of this country and making sure those that we represent have the opportunities to a great education, great healthcare, and the opportunity so that they can hope and they can believe that the next generation that they're raising, that grandmother here in Montgomery who's never voted, can see that her grandson can be the mayor of Montgomery like a Levar Stoney. And she can understand the same opportunities exist there as they do in any large city or in any affluent area. And I think until we get some of that, we're gonna have challenges, because we can do all we wanna do politically, but this is a society that's based on capitalism. It's based on money. And we have to make sure that our cities have access to it, our residents have access to those opportunities so that they can achieve the American dream. And I think then we're really talking about not just a political New South, but an economic New South as well.
And a new country to boot that'll follow the South. So Mayor Reed, thank you so much, Mayor Stoney. To quote a couple of popular songs, it starts with the man in the mirror. And even though it's hard to change, as Sam Cooke said, change is going to come.
That's right.
And on behalf of my organization, E Pluribus Unum, based on the work that we've done, our primary conclusion is that we are the way we are in this country because we designed it this way. And if we want it to be different, if we want to get close to that more perfect union that we all know that we can get to, where everybody participates, where diversity is a strength, not a weakness, where we're lifting each other up rather than tearing people down, we're going to have to get through the issue of race. Can't go over it, can't go around it, can't go under it. As Kareem Abdul-Jabbar said, when you turn the light on, you can see it everywhere. And even though white people mostly think it's an individual act of aggression, I think most African Americans and people of color understand that they're institutional challenges that we have, and everybody has to put into the pot and commit to it. So you guys, thank y'all so much for your time. Good luck and God bless you in running your cities and making the difficult decisions that you have. I know your constituents are relying on you to lead, not to follow the science, and to take care of everybody. And thank Tom for having all of us. I know I speak on behalf of the two mayors saying we really enjoyed this, and we hope you'd enjoyed it as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mayors Reed, Stoney, Landrieu, for an incredible conversation. On behalf of our team and our community at TomTom, we'd like to thank you all for delivering these important messages and these call to actions here today. And also for all you in attendance for being here as well and joining us. If you enjoyed this session, please consider becoming a contributing member to the foundation. You can do so on our website, tomfoundation.org/give. Your donation helps ensure that we can continue to do this work for the months and years to come. We hope you'll join us for other sessions throughout the season. We got 7 weeks of this coming, so we're looking forward to it. This week's all focused around equity and community health. Tomorrow, we're hosting the Virginia State Health Commissioner, Dr. Norm Oliver. We have a panel discussion around the Black maternal health crisis. And then there's a meet and greet as well at 5 for those of you who want to talk to some folks who are interested in these issues. So we'd like to thank our sponsors. Without their support, none of this would be possible. Today's session was brought to you by the Thomas Jefferson Foundation at Monticello, as well as the Hartfield Foundation. So thank you all again. Thank you, mayors, and we'll see you soon.
The day of reckoning is finally here. No justice, no peace for too many years. We're marching for equality in every state, choosing love over violence, brutality, and hate. We're gonna stay.